Hi, and welcome back to Santiago's Dead Waspcast. This is Matt Dalby, and this episode, number 7, is the third part of recording of myself and Adrian Slatcher in discussion back in October, I believe, possibly early November. And we pick up where we left off last week. We just finished talking about Gulliver's Travels, and we go on to talk about blue, the colour and the concept, motion capture and regressive politics in Hollywood films, and much more besides. So enjoy.
And that was quite interesting.
I mean, one of the things that Jarman goes on about in blue is that it was a very difficult colour to get for paints. It was incredibly valuable. Lapis lazuli was a very valuable commodity because it was so difficult to obtain. Although you can think of counterexamples, yes, it is quite rare in nature.
But I think that's it's still rare. You think about food. When you see the only food you see that's blue is like blue ice cream, really.
Yeah,
and it looks wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You just go. It does feel and look wrong. Why is that?
Yeah, it probably looks like something diseased.
Yeah.
It possibly speaks to that kind of probably very primitive part of the brain that's a possible suggestion for why you have the uncanny valley with animation, with some sort of artificial humans, that it looks very close to being what it's meant to be. It looks very close to being right, but it looks sort of subtly wrong. There seems to be something sort of subconsciously a bit diseased or a bit not right about it, which sort of triggers a kind of revulsion response.
It'd be interesting you seeing the Rachel McLean for that, because they are real people playing the characters, but they've been so morphed by both their costume, so their faces haven't got nose, they've got some sort of weird. So the eyes and mouth are real.
Yeah.
But there's so much going on there. I think you are kind of perplexed, because they're not animations. They're not David Serkis, with as Golem, where they've actually just had motion capture over the top of them. They are actors, actor kind of essentially performing in costume, but that costume is then digitally enhanced, if you like. So fascinating, really.
Yeah.
They do feel human, because there is human there, but it's a very skewed human.
I mean, Andy Serkis and that whole idea of kind of motion capture acting, that seems like a kind of emerging field of acting that's different from sort of performance styles that we've been used to.
It's closer to dance, I think.
Yeah,
in some ways.
and there's I don't think there's many people who do it yet, and it's still kind of emerging.
Well, he's created a company in London that now are actually, essentially he realised the technique he was doing here was he was inventing new ways of acting, methodologies. Essentially, you're interacting, aren't you? You're interacting with technology that you can't see, and so it requires a new skill set.
Yeah,
and so he's been very successful in the company he's set up in kind of this. I've done some work with motion capture stuff over the years in my day job, and it's fascinating how it's changed. A few years ago, even 10 years ago, it was so very expensive. All you could do really was and computer power wasn't quite enough.
No.
So all you could really do was a head. Yeah. So, the motion capture was a head, and that was kind of used for the eyes, and everything else could be animatronic or or 3D or whatever, but it was the head that was that. I think even between the first Lord of the Rings film and the last, the technologies that Weta, which is Peter Jackson's studio in New Zealand, were using, had moved on to such an extent that it was this whole body thing, and because they had this, I suppose, non-human character in Gollum. I don't like the Lord of the Rings films. I don't really know the books, but I have to say the Gollum stuff is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is something brand new, I think.
Oh yeah, I thought that was something they actually got right in those films. It was the one thing that I was worried about from the radio adaptation that I'd listened to, sort of late 70s, Radio 4 did or early 80s, did an adaptation, and their Gollum was really good. And I was worried they weren't going to get it right, but they actually did. They bungled a lot of other things in the films. And there's things in those films I don't like. The one that really interested me was Peter Jackson's King Kong, which I don't like, and I've never managed to sit through the whole thing. It's bloated, it's overlong, it's got some really... It's got a lot of actors that I don't like in it.
And it's trying to improve on a perfect film as well.
Yeah. But I don't think you've even got to King Kong by the time the first film was finished.
Yeah.
The first film does its business in an hour.
Yeah.
And it's great, and it's possibly, arguably, less racist than this one, because you've got these horrible sort of cannibal natives, which are just like, I'm very uncomfortable about this.
There's some weird things with Hollywood. I noticed in the mid-90s and into the 2000s, even Hollywood indie films were very right-wing in some ways. So I'll give a couple of examples to give in the Royal Tenenbaums, which is early 2000s, isn't it, I think. The Royal Tenenbaums, which I do like. Basically, the feckless husband has left the family. Angelica Huston's is the mother who's kind of left, and all the neuroses of the children are blamed on the fact that she's brought them up on her own, and they've been missing their father, which is a classic right-wing Christian narrative, really. Yeah. And similarly in the film Donnie Darko, the only way anything can be back good again is by Donnie Darko essentially sacrificing himself. Yeah. So the isolated loner has to die. Yeah. And I'm like, it's like, no, you can't. Yeah. And that's, in some ways, that's very like, if you look at 19th century literature, the feisty girl, whether she gets in trouble or not, has to die, and because they only or go mad or something terrible has to happen. She has to give up join the nunnery. And it's because often it might be a writer like George Eliot, even though she would like the character to live on in a better way, the mores of the time don't allow that.
Well, you've reminded me of another film that did this kind of thing, which really annoyed me, and it was it was Benjamin Button. I don't know the source material.
Yeah, it's a Fitzgerald story.
Yeah, I was kind of on board with it, although I sometimes find David Fincher, it's a bit, his films tend to be a bit of a sausage fest, and this one, it was clearly in love with. It was a fine performance from Brad Pitt, but it was in love with his character as kind of a tragic hero who's doomed. And toward kind of the middle of the film, maybe toward the end, he encounters two female characters who will become important. One of them is Tilda Swinton, who is older than him. She's very independent. She becomes a lover because she's very independent, so very different. She obviously is never going to be the persisting love interest, and she gets written out. She sort of gradually vanishes from his life because he also comes across another character played by Kate Blanchett, and this film completely wastes two brilliant female actors.
Yeah.
And she's again a fascinating character. She's a she's a dancer, but she's a kind of independent, drug-taking, bisexual, vibrant woman. She's really interesting, but she's the potential love interest. But bear in mind that he's
backwards. Yeah.
Bearing in mind he's aging backwards, so she's going to become his carer. And she's an interesting character, and she comes on and the screen lights up and you think, I want to see a film about this person, I like this person. And then you have a scene where she's talking with a friend and you see a view of her coming out of sort of down studio into an alley, and at that point you know exactly what is going to happen, which is that a car comes zooming down the alley, knocks her and breaks both her legs. She has to be, it's literally that crude, she has to be physically broken to become the appropriate love interest for this character. And she starts out as lover and then sort of becomes mother as he regresses to childhood. And that was the point. It was like, this film is going to do this. It's actually literally going to break her. And it does, and at that point I was just like, okay, fuck you.
And and there's a lot been taught by a writer I like Sophie Mayer and stuff about things like the Bechdel test and particularly around film and the lack of female stories, and female directors and female producers and female writers. I think what I find really, really shocking, and I don't watch that many contemporary movies these days. What I find really, really shocking is I perceive there are so many interesting stories about women, about male and women interaction, about women interaction, about male interaction. There are so many contemporary stories because we are quite a fluid world. We're a fluid world where we haven't got quite the restrictions we were in the past, and we know like Hollywood thrived on those contradictions. The working class boy meeting the posh girl, that sort of thing. But there's so many stories about unexpected lives, the fact people live longer, I suppose age difference relationships are no longer just older men with younger women. There can be, younger men with older women, and that's not just a cliche. I know several examples. And there's also stories about people having children very young, and then, whereas in the past they'd have to give up their children, actually they've grown. I've got a good friend who's single mother. Her son's teenager now, going off to university, and she's young. She's younger than me. She's going to have a second act to her life, which is untold, really. And this is not uncommon. And yet we still seem to have these kind of cliched stories, which are, Alexander Sirk would recognise.
Well, you have all sorts of potential for.
Is it Douglas Sirk?
Douglas, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
For kind of cross-cultural relationships. People who've emigrated to places, encountering cultures and people from cultures that they don't understand. But even then, sort of on smaller scales, perhaps stories about discovering your identity. Perhaps, for instance, discovering that you're gay or bisexual, and then chafing against the kind of identity that you're expected to have within that community, and trying to sort of, okay, these are my people. And then going, well, actually, no, this is not quite the identity that I want.
Well, I used to live I worked in an office where, in the voluntary sector years ago, may have told you this before, where there were I think that there were 10 people in the office. There's maybe 5 men, 5 women, 6 men, 6 women, something like that. 4 of the 6 men were gay men.
Yeah.
And they were all different.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were. That's not good. Yeah, but they were different ages. And it was fascinating because, it was quite rare. It would still be rare now for the majority of the men in an office to be gay.
Yeah.
And they were. But they were like not from 4 different communities, but partly because of age. The way the gay community's changed over the years meant that the one in the 50s was quite an activist because he grew up in that period. The one in the 40s was, I suppose, he's going on Iron John weekends and kind of trying to find himself, psychology and kind of that sort of stuff. The one in the 30s was working out because he was trying not to put on weight because he was still kind of, I think, and yet obviously the one who was like 20 or something was just having the time of his life, and it was really interesting, the dynamics between them, and between other people in the office like myself as well, because I thought, this is great. This is there is a sitcom or a story in some of these stories, and then I was thinking about it recently, and I suppose Queer as Folk was the late 90s, was it?
Yeah.
And it's still not really been replicated. I know the director did a series recently, didn't he?
Yeah.
But in a sense, you expect there's going to be a few novels coming out about gay marriage and stuff like that, perhaps in the future. I'm not sure, but it'd be quite interesting to see how long it takes for these things to filter through. I know with the AIDS crisis, the first I suppose cultural responses to the AIDS crisis came quite late. There are things like Angels in America.
Yeah.
They are Tom Gunn's The Man with the Night Sweats. Philadelphia, I guess, was first mainstream film. Randy Schultz's And the Band Played On, which was the cultural history of it, which this week they've sort of debunked the idea of this patient zero.
Yeah.
It's still a very good book, but it was kind of propagated through this history. But it actually took quite a few years. I think I think it's about 87 or something. Those things came out for artistic responses to the AIDS crisis to actually kind of filter through society. We've got a kind of faster turnover of things nowadays. So after 9/11, there was quite a lot of really bad books come out about that. Every American writer felt like he had to write about it, rather than waiting 20 years. And weirdly enough, I thought one of the best responses to 9/11 was Simon Armitage's Out of the Blue, which was a film poem.
Right, I've avoided that because I have opinions on Simon Armitage.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think he works often a lot better when he's in a collaborative space. So because he's actually not, he's quite demotic in that sense. So the story, which was the film aspect of it, his words are very simple, and they're a bit kind of telling the stories of people from the building. And then we have had some responses to the financial crash in 2008. There's been a couple of films now and stuff, but because that hasn't really all played out yet,
not by a long way.
It's almost like art struggles with this.
Well, in terms of the financial crash, as far as I'm concerned, something like Rise of Jeremy Corbyn and Momentum is part of the effect of that. Brexit is a consequence of that. The rise of Trump is all these things, and I mean, it's still not resolved. There are still structural problems with capitalism. There's no question about that. There's other crises on the horizon, and I mean, it's still we still don't know how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I think an element of this is about. Well, I'm 50 next year, which feels. I'm sure when it's gone and past, I'll feel like my 50s as I did in my 40s. Like, oh my God, I'm 40, and then my 40s are great, you know. But in my 50s, you go, oh God, no one's going to want to employ me, no one's going to want to go out with me, no one's want to be my friend, you know. I'm going to get weird bits of hair, you know, that sort of thing. I've already got the weird bits of hair. But you kind of think, well, actually, you know, as a generation, I don't think. I feel like this is about the fourth trauma my generation's had, because when I left school, or would have left school in '83, there were no jobs. All people from my school either joined the dole or joined the army. At that time, they wanted more people in the army because they'd just lost 1,000 people in the Falklands. It was kind of it was a worrying world with the Cold War still.
Oh yeah.
And then we had recession after recession. And it was only really when the Labour Party came in power in '97 that I felt we had this brief period of actual prosperity that was shared by all. And then, of course, that went a bit out of kilter. You know, obviously there was foreign policy disaster of the Iraq War. But 2008 suddenly kind of, you know, sent the whole pack of cards sliding. And yet, you know, things have got better over the years in lots of different ways. Things like the internet. I'm amazed how we take that for granted. You know, connectivity and
Yeah.
I've talked to Richard, who was on podcast with us before, about how was it we managed to find out about bands and films and stuff in the early '80s. And I have no idea. Yeah, I think it was probably references in interviews in the NME.
Yeah, it was newspapers, it was magazines, it was writing letters, trading tapes.
Yeah, walls in record shops.
Yeah. Well, I lived in the middle of nowhere, so I was having to rely on sort of music magazines, poetry magazines, writing to people, exchanging tapes, that kind of thing. Because I had to go.
How did you find out about poetry? That'd be interest me a bit. Yeah. Or how did you other than school and Faber and Faber books that people see in the library or the bookshop?
It was largely accidental. Well, I mean, my parents had a lot of poetry books. I wasn't interested in poetry as a child. I was, part of my English literature at school, I was asked to. We were asked to put together personal anthologies of poetry and write about the poems. I completely flunked that element. I couldn't do it. I picked stuff at random and wrote vacuous nonsense about it.
Job as a critic waits.
But absolutely. But then I started writing, and I was interested in novels, which is ironic because I don't think I've got a novel in me, or if I have, it will be shit. I don't really have the structural sensibility. I can do a play, I can do short stories, but a novel really is not within my capability. But I was interested in writing as experiment. And that was in several ways. So there was kind of at least three branches to this. One was being interested in playing with structure and form and genre. So, is this poetry? Is this philosophy? Is this fiction? Is this autobiography? Kind of blurring those boundaries, or even is this writing? At what point does this become music or dance, if that's possible? How far can you press this? Another one was linguistic and trying to make the language as simple as possible, which ended up making it much more complex, so dropping out kind of conjunctions and subjunctives and linking words as far as possible. So effectively, you're ending up just with almost with just nouns and verbs. Although nouns I was a bit iffy on.
Well, you know, I know, if I've got books of like poetry manuscripts that I wrote in my late teens, early 20s, whilst I was at university, and there's quite a lot of experimental poetry in there. But I know I was writing experimental poetry totally in a vacuum.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know there was such a thing as experimental poetry, and I had no reference points other than maybe E. E. Cummings.
No.
Who I've picked up a book of his poems in W. H. Smith's, and when I first poem I had published in a magazine was in about 96, 97, and I'd just seen the magazine in the corner house, I think, and I sent off some poems there, and it was quite a traditional poem. It was short. It was a bit Simon Armitage-y, and it got published. And but I was unaware of other poetry magazines and stuff like that. And then there's this book came out called The Small Press Guide, about 96, 97. I bought this, and it was amazing. It got like 200 poetry magazines, and I spent about 150 quid on 10 subscriptions or whatever.
Yeah.
And I got all these poetry magazines, and I was like, where did these come from? But even then, that was actually, those poetry magazines, small press magazines, were actually quite traditional. People like Smith's Knoll and Frogmore Papers and other poetry and whatever. It was like the avant-garde, or the stuff you and I know from the other room, just literally did not exist, or existed in such a hidden space.
Yeah.
And it was only really in the early 2000s that I became aware of I suppose, things like poetry wars, the British poetry, the alternative poetry tradition, and I'm sure it was all going on. But there clearly was a gap, I think, in the maybe 80s and 90s where the visibility of anything like that was not there at all.
No, I mean, I was doing these experiments. They kind of drove me towards something that was more poetry than anything else. And so eventually I started picking up books, and I started with the Romantics, which, as it happens, was a reasonable place to start because they politically chimed with me, and particularly Shelley, whose ideas run ahead of his writing quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And Byron, who is a bloody amazing writer. I mean, technically, there's not many people to match him. Thomas Hardy, perhaps, some others of that era, but
and of course he was the best-selling writer of his day as well. Wasn't
he? Yeah. And I mean, not only that, he was political, but unlike others, he also spoke in the Lords and spoke in favour of radical causes. So he actually put his money where his mouth was. But I then started sending things out and got lots of people telling me to read sort of very conservative stuff, which I didn't like, and and I found I was chafing against it. I didn't know where the experimental writing was. I knew I didn't like what I was being told to read.
Ditto,
but it was sort of trying to find a place, trying to find something that worked, and sort of constantly being pushed in the direction of people whose work I really couldn't abide. And it took me until 2008 and picking up a Caroline Bergvall book, and then researching her online and finding this whole world of other poetries, experimental poetries out there, by which time I was already embarked on my creative writing course and was moving away from writing into sort of sound art and sound poetry and visual poetry, and expanding my practice away from this, because
it's weird, isn't it? Because I think the weird thing was in the early 80s, I had very good access in the 90s to alternative culture and historical alternative culture, but the poetry that went along with that was pretty much the beats, really. Yeah, and it was nothing modern, or if it was, there were a few presses.
There was occasional collections that would have bits of concrete poetry in them.
Yeah,
that was about as much as you.
Yeah, and I was lucky because I did my MA. I did it under Michael Schmidt, even though it's a fiction MA, and obviously Carcanet has got quite a diverse list. And I remember there was a woman who was interning for him at the time. It was a bit gothic. I can't remember her name actually. Nicola somebody, I can't remember. And she was doing a PhD. So I said, "What are you doing a PhD on?" She said, "On this concrete poet. You know, Dush, Dom Sylvester Huillard."
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Literally, I've never heard of him. Yeah, because his archive is at the John Rylands, I think.
Yeah, I was talking about it with Richard the other day.
Oh, right, yeah. And obviously, you know, because the archive was there, because Carcanet based there was this opportunity to do, and he got this. What Dush was most amazing for was this copious correspondence with Francis Bacon and all pretty much and I think Dush was a Franciscan monk, was it? Yeah. So bizarre story, you know, and got this copious correspondence with half of the second half of the 20th century's avant-garde, really. And I remember looking up this concrete poet on Google. It wasn't Google then; it's probably Alta Vista or Lycon.
Yeah.
Right? And all I came up with was information about concrete companies, and I actually wrote this found poem with my search results from this kind of concrete company, and they called it something like "unsuccessful search for a concrete poet on Alta Vista." Yeah, but it was quite weird, you know, and obviously I at the time. And there were lots of little synergies like that, and as you know, Manchester with the Other Room and stuff like that. It was kind of a few writers just making individual connections.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's times at the Other Room when you're sitting there and you're looking at the people who are in the audience and you're thinking, Jesus wept. This is some high-powered grouping.
Yeah.
And also, had I known about these people in the mid-90s when I was searching around looking for stuff, my life would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, you got Geraldine Monk, Alan Halsey, Robert Shepherd, then obviously the organisers, Scott and Tom and James, and then fellow travellers, I guess is what I would call myself, really.
And from time to time, certainly in the early years, occasionally Alan Fisher.
Yeah. Just
like, God.
Yeah, you know, it's like it was kind of, that has been a pleasure, and I've always been surprised because I go to a lot of art events and music events, and I've always been involved in alternative music, and I go to a lot of visual arts, and I've always been surprised how little crossover there is between you get the odd person like Heather Phillipson, who's both a poet and a very successful artist, but I don't think she's ever performed in Manchester. So
no. Well, I mean, although I'm very poor at organising stuff, I'm not. You know, that was really part of the reason why Counting Backwards very briefly came into existence, because again, I was going to experimental music events, and there'd be one group of people there. And then I'd go to a gallery, I'd go to a bunch of gallery openings, and there'd be another group of people there, and then I'd go to the other room, and it was a different group, and it was like, you people should really all be talking, you should be going to these events. there should be some greater crossover, and there really wasn't. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'd like to get back into organising. You know, I'd like to get back into trying to break down those boundaries, because it's a shame that you have these different communities that aren't really communicating.
No, I do wonder about it, really, and we are still in a world of gatekeepers, I think, and gatekeepers also keep people out, I think, and sometimes not on purpose. But sometimes it's almost because they have almost a too pure view of what their niche is. You know, I sometimes think when I go to certain poetry events, there should be a little fish on the door, you know, to say early Christians here, no Romans allowed. You know, it does seem a little bit secret handshake at times.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's blockages that you might not even be aware of because of who your social group are, what kind of bits of the internet you use, what kind of pubs and places you go to. So a lot of what the events I go to are overwhelmingly white, and they're overwhelmingly male.
And they're often in pubs, and
and it's not that people are necessarily trying to consciously build barriers, but there are barriers that are there. I mean, certainly with experimental music things, it's very often a particular kind of white bloke as well, and you'll have blokes going up to the stage or wherever the performance area is and looking at the kit, looking at what the pedals and the...
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? I think it's kind of one of those things is that I don't think you can make changes to social justice with things that are not necessarily about social justice. Like, I've spent a lot of time on community projects where we can put something digital in to help solve this problem. And over the years I've learnt very much that if the problem is far more wide-reaching, you know, like than being unable to get on the internet or internet access, then giving internet access doesn't solve the problem.
No.
But what you can do is, if there is a problem there, you know, then it can help, if you like. So I think there's always ways and means. You know, like I think, you know, small galleries, small publishers, etc., do sometimes get in the neck for, oh, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing more? And the reality is, we all limited a little bit by our social circles, etc., and our tastes. You know, that's part of it. But actually, the bigger criticism should be really to the big galleries, the big publishers, the BBC. You know, was it the BBC was called Hideously White? Yeah. You know, and you go, well, like I work for the council, and it's a very egalitarian organisation in that sense. You know, it's pretty much, you know, it's not overly white. It's certainly heavily female. A lot of people there have openly got disabilities that are not a problem for them doing their job, etc., etc. There are still some pockets of kind of middle class, middle aged white men running the show. And that's always seems to be what comes out of this. But yeah, I think it's good for us always to remember that we should if one's in a position to do more, one should do more. But you know, like we when I used to run a poetry magazine, and also it goes when you put on an event with a panel or whatever, you know, it doesn't take a lot to make sure there's some gender balance. You know?
No.
Yeah. But it is a lot harder, I think, to basically pull in, say, poets from a different scene and a different tradition, if they don't if they don't see the connections themselves, or
No.
they feel some alienation about that, really.
Yeah, or they perhaps feel, oh, I'm going to be the token ethnic here, or
Yeah, it's like
because nobody wants to feel like they're a box ticking exercise for someone else to feel good about their own virtue signalling.
I think what's been a shame over the last few years, and maybe this is a sign of assimilation of some sort, is that I always felt that more avant-garde approaches to literature in particular tended to encourage, tend to often come from different communities, so that William Burroughs didn't write the way he did because he was gay, but the fact that he was gay and an outsider led to him writing the way he did a little bit.
Yeah.
Same with Kafiaka in the 70s. Adrian Rich very much made the point that if you're writing in the language of the patriarchy, you can't write like you want to, because the words have got meaning. And then you look at some of the Harlem Renaissance writers, some of the 60s writers, people like Gil Scott Heron and stuff, and clearly the idea of writing a new vernacular and a new language, it becomes necessary. And I just wonder over the last few years if maybe assimilation or whatever else has meant there's been a kind of moving towards a broad middle, so that you think in music terms, the big stars, people like Beyonce, Jay-Z, etc., are quite. They might be politically quite strong, but musically they're quite conservative, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean that's kind of across the board. I mean, music doesn't have the kind of sort of the kind of generational differences that it it's not as vital a force in that sense.
There's not a group of 18-year-olds coming up with music that their 25-year-old older brothers don't like.
No.
Yeah.
That's I mean, obviously there's fringes to everything, but again, it's a shame you're always aware of things that you're missing out on that are happening elsewhere.
I think we've done about 2 hours, Matt.
Right, excellent. Okay, well, we'll wind that up and then I'll edit this later.